Welcome back. I'm Bob Cusack, Editor-in-Chief of The Hill. Thank you for joining us for our final session of the Sustainability Imperative, our two-day virtual festival on all things sustainability. I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Environmental Defense Fund, for its support of today's event. During our final segment today, we'll be speaking with sustainability thought leaders across a spectrum of expertise, from discussing conservation with actress Sigourney Weaver to highlighting Republican climate action on Capitol Hill with Congressman John Curtis, and much more. But before we dive in, don't forget you can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag #TheHillSustainability. My first guest this afternoon is Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm. She is a former governor of Michigan, where she added clean energy to the state's economic portfolio. Prior to that, she was also the state's Attorney General. I spoke to her a short while ago. A big welcome to you, Secretary Jennifer Granholm.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me on, Bob.
Well, you know, the headlines right now, couldn't have foreseen this a couple of years ago or on the campaign trail, but Russia has invaded Ukraine. That has added a lot of uncertainty to energy prices, and gas prices are skyrocketing. What do you see as an administration has taken a number of steps, but when can you expect relief for American consumers on gas prices?
Well, let me just start by saying, of course, the president is really concerned about this because 70% of the rise in inflation is attributable to fuel costs. And so it's one of the reasons why he has pulled out the biggest tool in our arsenal, which is the ability to release barrels of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It's the largest release that has ever been done in the history of the United States, 180 million barrels. And then he went to our allies to ask them to do the same thing from their Strategic Petroleum Reserves. So, number one is to make sure we have enough supply available. And the supply, of course, has come offline because Russia has invaded Ukraine, and all sorts of countries, including the US, including Canada, and others have said we are not going to buy Russian oil. And so that takes about 1.5 million barrels per day offline. We have to figure out how to replace that in order to stabilize markets. We've asked the oil and gas industry in the United States and around the world to increase supply to make up for that lost amount that Russia would have been exporting. So we think that in the next 6 months, before the end of the year, the oil and gas companies in the U.S. will make up that about 1 million barrels per day by increasing production. That's at least what the Energy Information Agency says. But ultimately, Bob, I mean, if, for example, the European Union decides that they too are going to ban Russian oil, that will pull probably doubling the amount that has been pulled off. And so the question, and that will cause supply to contract, and that will cause prices to go up. So I think, I have to be honest, I mean, within the next near amount of time, it's going to be difficult to see prices drop significantly because of the war in Ukraine. If you told me that the war was going to end very soon and we were going to be able to figure out how to replace those barrels, that would be a different thing. But I don't think we're in a certainty mode at this moment.
The Biden administration has had a very aggressive agenda on climate change, and a lot of climate change provisions were in Build Back Better, but that legislation has now basically died at the end of December because Democrats couldn't unite behind it, including Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Sinema. Are you hopeful that some type of Build Back Better, some version of it that could include certainly energy, maybe a trimmed down healthcare components, could move before the election?
I definitely am optimistic that we will see the elements of the tax credits, for example, that were in that Build Back Better be adopted. Now, as we know, that there's a lot of discussion about whether there's a bill that will be proceeding through reconciliation or through regular order. Bottom line is, I do think that there, especially because of the invasion of Ukraine, especially because we do not want to be under the thumb of petro dictators and we want to transition to be energy independent. Those Build Back Better climate, I mean, let's not call it Build Back Better because obviously that's changed, the title has changed, but the tax credits associated with clean energy to be able to really build out our energy sector. Democrats certainly have been very in favor of that, but Republicans have also said we want an all of the above strategy. Part of that all of the above strategy was addressed in the bipartisan infrastructure law, where there was a lot of technology that was invested in to be able to decarbonize fossil fuels. So now let's build out the other piece of it, which is the clean energy sector as well. And that's what those tax credits would do, including zero carbon emissions that both parties like, for example, clean hydrogen. Even though the demonstration projects were funded in the bipartisan infrastructure law, you need to make sure that you are also funding the generation of that energy carrier. Same thing with nuclear power. So, and certainly renewable energy. So I think that desire to see us as being truly energy independent and allowing us to transition to clean energy and to fossil fuels that are decarbonized, I think will creates an opportunity for us to have a mix. And I will say one other thing that's really important in that, Bob, is for example, the Solar Energy Manufacturing Act, where you are incentivizing the build out of the products that will get us to the goal of being net zero by 2050. Those products are going to be in demand, are in demand all across the world. We should be making them in the United States, using them in the United States. And part of those incentives for manufacturing in the United States will address the concerns that people have about getting our supplies from elsewhere in the world.
You mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure bill that the president signed into law, a big win for this president and the administration, and a number of us, including me, skeptical that that was going to get to the finish line. What happens now? Because publications like ours, we focus on legislation, but then it's got to be implemented. What do you see as the keys for implementing that huge law, which I know spans various government agencies, but over the next couple of years? What are the important things that people and really consumers need to know about so that they see a difference in their community?
Yeah, first of all, it's $62 billion that just came to the Department of Energy. So it's a very significant amount that we are focused on deploying. And so first part of that is modernizing and expanding our transmission grid so that we can deploy more clean energy sources and make sure that the power stays on if hurricanes or hackers hit. Then, of course, launching the clean energy demonstration projects that were funded in that bipartisan infrastructure law. And that means lowering the cost of next generation technologies like clean hydrogen, advanced nuclear, carbon capture, and get those to market, making homes and schools and churches more energy efficient, because of course efficiency is an important piece of the effort to reduce our CO2 emissions. And that means, of course, making money, or at least retaining money for American families and businesses too. And then a big part of this too is ensuring that underserved and that frontline communities receive 40% of the benefits of these climate investments, communities that have been at the back of the line that really should be at the front of the line, that should be part of this clean energy future instead of being victimized by being in the shadows of power plants and having kids disproportionately with asthma, et cetera. We want to make sure that no pocket of America is left behind in this transition to clean energy, jobs all over, and energy independence. And another piece of it that's really important is our domestic supply chain that we want to revitalize, especially for batteries, for example, so we can build all these clean energy technologies here with American parts and American labor. So very excited to be able to do that, including building out the infrastructure for charging electric vehicles, that $7.5 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure law to make sure that every community has access to charging, in addition to having access to electric vehicles that are cheaper because we're building the batteries and funding the next generation technologies that'll reduce the cost.
As I mentioned, you're a former governor of Michigan. What have you learned at the local level on energy issues that has been valuable to bring to Washington?
I think one of the reasons why I think the president asked me to do this job is because I was governor of Michigan at the time the auto industry went into bankruptcy. And we had to figure out how are we going to diversify our economy, because essentially our economic portfolio had been balanced on a table with one leg, which was the automotive industry, which we're really proud of. But we had built auto 1.0, car 1.0. We wanted to build car 2.0, which is the electric vehicle. And my point in raising this is that we went after strategically components of building the electric vehicle that were helped by the American, after the recession and the investment through the Recovery Act came to Michigan, funded a lot of the battery investments and the components to the battery, as well as the electric vehicle, and saving the auto industry. I say all of that because every community is unique. For Michigan, it was autos. For Iowa, they're looking at tremendous advances in wind and biofuels. In Texas, there's also a huge amount of wind. Who's going to be manufacturing the offshore wind turbines that will meet the president's goal of getting to 30 gigawatts of offshore power? Well, they should be along the Atlantic coast. And when we get to the Pacific, when we get the platforms that are able to do offshore wind that's floating, those components should be manufactured there. My point is every pocket of America has something unique to offer, and every local unit of government ought to be evaluating what is their comparative advantage in this clean energy sector. It's a $27 trillion market between now and 2030. That's a huge amount of opportunity for us to be making these products and using them here. And that's what one of the lessons from the local unit is, that you can lift yourself up. You can lift yourself from your knees, like Michigan was, if you are a struggling community, using strategic thought about what is it that you have to bring to this conversation, given that the energy sector, the clean energy sector in particular, is so utterly diverse and vast.
It is so important nationally, locally, and now globally, of course, specifically on national security. Energy is something we'll be talking about for short-term and the long-term. Secretary Granholm, thanks for joining us today.
You bet. Thanks so much for having me on.
My next guest is Congressman John Curtis of Utah. He chairs the Conservative Climate Caucus that has more than 75 Republican House members. Congressman Curtis, thanks for joining us today.
Delight to be with you. Thank you.
Congressman, tell me about this Conservative Climate Caucus. I have heard of it. I didn't know there were that many members of it. How often do you meet? What do you talk about? And what's the future of this caucus?
By the way, I've been told it's the second largest caucus in Washington. I think that's pretty exciting. We meet, when we're in DC, we meet approximately weekly, although sometimes we've had even 2 or 3 meetings. And our goal is to get Republicans comfortable about talking about climate issues and energy issues, and giving them the facts so that they're comfortable talking and able to actually offer ideas instead of just saying everything that we don't like.
And what is everything you don't like? That it's a hoax?
Well,
that climate change is a hoax?
No, it could be, I think, encompassed in kind of extremist ideas. I call them take your head off to fix a headache ideas. And I think that's turned Republicans off, kind of this extremism. And the reality of it is, I find that Republicans care deeply about the earth, and that they have a lot of good ideas.
As far as coming together, we're in election year, as you know, and Democrats have tried and so far failed to pass sweeping climate change legislation. We'll see if that's resurrected in the Senate in the coming months. That really will depend on Joe Manchin, Democrat from West Virginia. But going forward, energy is such a polarizing issue right now. Do you think the parties could come together? The House is likely to flip, so there'll probably be divided government in some shape or form in 2023. Do you think that potentially, and the odds are against this, that the parties could come together on some version of addressing climate change?
I think one of the misconceptions is that we don't. I'll point back to the Energy Act of 2020, one of the largest energy bipartisan bills ever passed, in reducing hydrofluorocarbons and investing in technology. And so sometimes I think our disagreements overshadow our agreements, and I do think we can come together. I think we have, and that we'll continue to. Not that it isn't difficult, right? Everything in DC can be difficult, but I think the past shows that we can work together.
The Democrats, as you know, after they took the House, they have set up a climate committee. Do you think that's necessary, or do you think there are other committees that have been around for many years and decades that can handle this, the committees of jurisdiction?
I met yesterday in a hearing with the health secretary, and they had increased the health budget $100 million for climate. And I think we have to be super careful with priorities. Look, I'm very involved in this, and I agree it's important. But when we start prioritizing climate over nutrition and things like that, I think that the American people are going to push back on that, and as they should. So I do think there's room for dialogue. I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee. That's a great place to have that dialogue and to have that legislation. But I think we have to be careful in some cases that it doesn't dominate otherwise very important priorities.
And so do you think it's likely that committee, if Republicans take over, that committee will not continue?
It's hard to say that, but I can tell you this, that we ourselves are working, Kevin McCarthy has started a task force on energy and climate. It's led by Garrett Graves from Louisiana. And its intent is to put meat on the bones for what Republicans would support and what we'll want to move forward in the next Congress. And so I think the dialogue will continue. It's just a matter of where and where it best belongs.
And that's a great point, because we have written about how House Republicans, Senate Republicans are not planning this, but House Republicans are planning some type of, and you're a lot more familiar with than I am, but some type of agenda like in 1994. When do we get to see that, or when will the Energy Task Force information data agenda, when will we get to see that, and specifically, when will voters get to see that?
So our goal is by the time they vote on us in November, we'll have that blueprint out there. And it's not just energy, it's foreign affairs, it's high tech, all of these different really important areas. And that we put together this, what we would call commitment to America in the fall, so that when they vote for us, they know what our agenda is. And then if we're fortunate enough to take the majority, we ourselves know how we're going to govern and what our blueprint will be.
The Democrats control Congress and the White House. Congressman, what has been flaws in their approach? Obviously, they've tried to ram something through using reconciliation, which is a process that Republicans use on the Trump tax cuts, as well as President Obama on Obamacare. But what have you seen as the mistakes of the Democratic majority on climate change in this Congress?
Listen, if I had a magic wand, we would start with this idea of worldwide greenhouse gas emissions, not just US, but worldwide greenhouse gas emissions. How do we reduce them? And if we spend $1 over here, what is the result? Let's spend that dollar where it reduces the very most. And so if I had to redo their plan, I'd simply say, let's focus on worldwide greenhouse gas emissions, not just US. And let's make sure when we're spending money that it's leading us to that goal in the most effective way, rather than more of this shotgun approach of, hey, let's put some charging stations in on a freeway without thinking through, is there even a grid that would service those? And even if there's a grid, is there power that would service those? And that's the type of thinking I think that Republicans hope to bring to this, more of a practical approach to reducing greenhouse gas emissions.
Congressman Curtis, just on energy prices now, obviously we have an ongoing war in the Ukraine. We have gas prices that are at record levels, inflation at the grocery store, as well as gas prices, a major concern. How do you balance addressing climate while also being cognizant of these high gas prices that are really frustrating so many consumers right now?
Well, you're right. And this is the good news about the message that Republicans want to bring to the table. I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't think you have to sacrifice national security. I don't think you have to pay high gas prices. And I don't think you have to kill our economy. And yet we can still reduce emissions. And that's the message we're trying to bring to the table, is they're not mutually exclusive. We can reduce emissions. We can be energy independent. We can bring prices down, and we can boost our economy. And let's be smart about this, because all of those categories are extremely important, and important to the American people.
And it's interesting, looking back over the years, and politics has gotten a lot more polarizing. But if you look back a couple decades, you had George W. Bush and Joe Lieberman and John McCain working on the environment, the cap and trade bill that passed the House in 2009, very controversial bill that Democrats have a different approach now than they did back then. But even back then, 8 Republicans in the House voted for that legislation. Joe Biden ran as a uniter, and that's part of the reason he's president today. But as you know, Republicans have been very frustrated. They don't feel like the White House has reached out. After the election, I don't think much is going to change probably before the election, but Joe Biden's probably going to have a choice. He's probably going to lose the House, maybe the Senate. Do you see some type of pivot from this president that could actually get some stuff done on a bipartisan basis next year and possibly the following 2024?
I really hope so. Really nothing of substance happens in Washington without bipartisan support. And when it does from time to time, then it's forever attacked. Right. So if we really want to make progress on this, we'll work on a bipartisan manner. And hey, listen, I was at the inauguration. I heard those promises to be bipartisan, and I'm ready to take him up on those. Right. And lift our end of the stick. We've got to work on this together, and being bipartisan will yield the best results for our country.
Just kind of interested on a personal level, have the White House reached out to you when you talk to other House Republicans on other issues? Has there been a lot of outreach, or really not much at all?
I would compliment Secretary Granholm, who came and met with my caucus, and we actually found some common ground in a couple of areas. One of them is on permit reform. And we all know permitting is taking too long. It doesn't matter whether you're trying to permit a wind farm or a nuclear facility, it's taking too long. So we found that common ground, and I'm excited to work with her and take her up on her willingness to work on that. And so, yes, but let me also say you can never do enough, right? Would love for them to reach out more and have more communication with us.
When you're at home in your home state of Utah, what are constituents talking about specifically on energy issues? Obviously, gas prices are a major concern, but what are you hearing at home that you take to Washington on a daily, weekly basis?
Yeah, my district is very conservative. Utah is very conservative. I represent coal, I represent oil and gas, and the demonization of not just oil and gas and coal, but the very people who for decades have sacrificed their health and their safety so that all of us could go over to the wall and flip a switch and have the lights come on is really unfortunate, particularly when you study the facts and realize that we can use these good people and these U.S. petroleum products that have life cycle greenhouse gas emissions that are much less than, for instance, Russia. And why we're not advocating for them and ensuring for them is a surprise to me, because we can actually use these good people to reduce emissions.
Congressman John Curtis, chair of the Conservative Climate Caucus, this has been great. Thanks for speaking with me today. Really appreciate it. I think it's great that both parties are able to talk about it, and I think it's great that you're urging your Republican colleagues, hey, let's talk about this issue.
Thanks for the time, and hope we can do it again.
My next guest is Shalonda Baker, Deputy Director for Energy Justice at the Department of Energy. She joins me now to discuss how she is bringing a justice-first approach to our transition to clean energy. Welcome, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, let's dive right in. Tell us about energy justice and the Justice 40 initiative.
I would love to. So I think you mentioned my title, which is Deputy Director for Energy Justice. I also serve as the Secretary's advisor on equity here at the Department of Energy. But this is the first time the department has ever had a role like mine. I mean, there's never been a Deputy Director for Energy Justice. And my charge is really to drive equity within this transition away from fossil fuels to clean energy. The president has signaled that equity and racial justice will be a part of this transition. And that is my work every single day at the agency. We see energy justice in a few ways. So energy justice is very much about the social and economic participation of all communities in this energy transition. And in particular, we're targeting communities that for so long have borne the burdens of the design of the energy system. So we really want to make sure that not only is there equitable social and economic participation in the energy system, but that the benefits and burdens are equitably distributed. And so that is the focus of our work every single day. And we're doing that in our standard programs, as well as this historic implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law.
And tell us, as far as specific examples across the country of where there has been progress made over the last 18 months or so, and where do you see kind of long-term goals?
Sure. So we were so delighted a couple of weeks ago to release the announcement of 23 communities across this country that have been selected for extraordinary technical assistance to really make sure that their hopes and dreams with respect to the design of their energy systems are realized. And so this is the Communities LEAP program. This is historic at the department. And Communities LEAP stands for Communities Local Energy Action Program. And so those communities have said, we want to be a part of this transition. We want to get technical assistance, and we already have our vision for where we want to go. And so the department combined funds from across different parts of the agency, and those different programs are providing technical assistance to those communities to, again, help them realize their ultimate goals with respect to this energy transition. And so once we have that technical assistance in place, those communities will be competitive in competing for, dollars under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And of course, here at DOE, we have $62 billion in infrastructure funding that is going to be, distributed throughout the country, and every single dollar will have to have we'll have to go through this sort of equity filter, which is to say that we are embedding equity into the program design of all of those new programs. So we'll also have 60 new programs that are stood up under this bipartisan infrastructure law. So we're excited about the Communities LEAP program. It's one part of a broader strategy to bring equity into this transition, but we expect to see more and more progress as we continue to roll out new programs under the bill.
And specifically, you're talking about the bipartisan infrastructure bill. That's where that funding is coming from. Is that right?
Correct. And we use shorthand. We use the bill as shorthand to describe the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and there were some concerns from progressives in Congress about the bipartisan infrastructure bill because they wanted to have one big piece of legislation that would include infrastructure as well as climate change initiatives. And of course, the transportation bill has passed, but the second component has not. Build Back Better is basically dead, and maybe will get resurrected in the coming weeks. But how do you deal with, our nation's transportation system is crumbling. Everybody knows that. There have been countless studies on that. But how do you balance the need for improving the nation's infrastructure, building bridges with the environment? How is the administration doing that?
Well, here's what I'll say. I know there are people every single day who are working toward the Build Back Better dream and initiative, and also working to make sure that legislation doesn't die sort of on the vine. I think there are a lot of great folks, including the secretary, who've been working hard to continue those discussions. What I will say is that the bipartisan infrastructure law will be transformative. So it is the single largest investment in our department, the Department of Energy, since its inception. And we have an extraordinary opportunity to create new jobs in communities that have never before seen the type of economic development that will be coming their way. But we also are going to be in partnership with those communities, thinking through the type of infrastructure, thinking through the ways in which we do infrastructure development in those places. So again, this speaks to that energy justice component, engaging communities at every step of the way in development. So not only do we have an extraordinary opportunity to create jobs, but we have an extraordinary opportunity to create new businesses. And so this is where the long-term wealth creation happens. So those new jobs are not just, jobs that are temporary in nature. We want to create long-term, life-sustaining, thriving jobs, or jobs that give, folks an opportunity to move up that economic ladder. And again, new businesses in those communities that, again, have been left behind in the past. And so that's the opportunity that we have, and that's what we're laser focused on every single day at the agency, making sure that every single program that we create under the bipartisan infrastructure law brings that economic development and those opportunities to communities. And you heard the secretary, maybe you heard her talk about this. She was giving testimony on the Hill today, and she talked about the ways that we're thinking about this opportunity and the ways that we're really again, laser focused on the economic development components of the bipartisan infrastructure law and what that infrastructure really will mean for ordinary Americans.
It's interesting. You have a more optimistic approach than some others who are very disappointed that the Build Back Better has not passed yet. But you raised some good points about the transportation bill is a significant bill with significant funding that has been overdue and has been a bipartisan initiative that just hasn't passed until this Congress. But moving forward from that, how do you, as far as working with stakeholders, if you think about, and on the optimism thought process is, business communities, oil and gas companies, decades ago, they weren't talking about transitioning. You've written a book about transitioning. Just have you seen the business community and other stakeholders take this a lot more seriously in recent years? Because that obviously is some good news.
Well, I'm so delighted that you mentioned industry and different stakeholders in the business community, because every single day I talk to folks from the utility sector. I talk to companies like GE that are really keen to understand what, again, we mean by energy justice and what the expectations of the agency will be as these industry leaders and stakeholders compete for those funds. And we have high expectations. So we do expect communities to be engaged in unprecedented ways by industry. And I think, there are some leaders out there. I think different folks are already kind of testing out different ways of doing this work. But it's not only the social engagement. So stakeholder engagement is only one part of the picture. We're really looking for ways that communities can be true economic partners in this historic development process. So there will be opportunities there. But I think you're giving the economic stakeholders, the industry stakeholders, a little bit of short shrift here. I mean, they're actually leaning in and very excited about what's next. Things like supplier diversity are also a big part of the conversation. There are many industry stakeholders that already have robust supplier diversity programs where they've been engaging underrepresented businesses for years. And so this too will be a part of the broader set of expectations that we have as we're rolling out the new programs under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law.
Shalanda, earlier you mentioned new jobs, and when you have new jobs, you need job training. And climate change is really about transitioning the workforce in a different way. How has that gone? What have you seen works as far as worker retraining, new jobs, moving people from old oil and gas jobs to new, like climate change, clean jobs? That's a challenge because, as you know, change, a lot of people don't like change.
Right. Well, so we have some help from Congress here, and there are ways in which Congress has embedded requirements that new projects, new energy projects, go into those communities that have, as the member before me stated, been the source of all of that baseload power that we've had for so many generations. And so Congress is very keen on ensuring that those communities don't get left behind. And we talk about those communities here at the department as energy communities. So these are communities that have relied on fossil fuel industries to also fuel their economies. And so there are programs that are designed to reach those communities. And again, in our design of those programs and our rollout of those programs, we're ensuring that the workers don't get left behind in that. And so I think, the Secretary of Energy has mentioned in many public comments that there are a couple different kind of guiding principles in the way that we're thinking about this energy transition. One is, of course, equity. And I'm so, again, proud to be her equity advisor. That's our North Star at the agency. And the second, though, is creating high quality jobs. And again, in communities that have been left behind, as well as the communities that for so long have been a part of our economy and helped us get the lights on, right? I mean, that resonates with all of us here at the agency. So we're very careful in how we're thinking about program design to ensure that those workers don't get left behind, but we're also bringing new workers into this new economy, this new clean energy economy that's going to be created over the next 5 to 10 years.
Lots going on. Shalanda Baker, Deputy Director for Energy Justice at the Department of Energy. Thanks for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
My final guest of the program is actress environmentalist Sigourney Weaver. She's best known for her award-winning career in films like Alien, Gorillas in the Mist, and Avatar. She's also a dedicated conservation activist, serving as honorary chair of the D.N. Foresee Gorilla Fund International, and speaking about climate issues in front of both the UN General Assembly and the Democratic National Convention. We're thrilled to have her with us this afternoon. Sigourney Weaver, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Bob, for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Well, actually, we've actually, 30 years ago, we were on the set of Dave together in a scene in Georgetown.
No kidding.
Yeah, I was in the background. I stayed in the background. I didn't want to steal the scene. So it's good to see you again. Since then, you've had a great career. And you've also been very involved in climate change. Tell me why you got involved in this issue.
Well, I think that, growing up in New York State, we've always had a very strong environmental heritage. The leaders of at the turn of the century protected the Hudson as the source of water for New York City. So, spending a lot of time in upstate, I participated in bond acts early on to protect that water. And one of the most exciting things going on right now, which I'd love to talk about, is the 30 by 30. 2022 is a great year. Right now, we have two big opportunities for the oceans. And as part of the America the Beautiful initiative, I'm sure you know that we've our plan is to protect 30% of our waters by 2030. And about 23% of those waters are protected now, but they're almost all in the Pacific. So by 2030, we hope to have included more waters on the rest of the continental US to really provide for the resiliency of the ocean around our continent. And then the other thing that's happening this year that I think is so exciting is there are two things happening globally, because yes, it's very important for us to really highly protect 30% of the waters around our country. And by that, I mean no human activity, no commercial fishing, no mining, no drilling. This will help the oceans rebound and the fish stocks rebound. And our hope is that this year we can expand that philosophy to include the rest of the earth, because this year the UN is going to bring up the High Seas Treaty. And the high seas are the high seas, and it's about 2/3 of our oceans. And they're like the Wild West. There's no oversight. And the High Seas Treaty, when it's brought up in the UN, will give every nation the opportunity to support some basic, oversight of these oceans so that we can keep our communal oceans healthy. And the other exciting thing is the International Global Diversity Conference in August, where we say we're going to protect 30% of our waters. And we also commit to trying to get other countries to commit to protecting 30% of their country's waters. And if we can succeed in these initiatives this year, it will make such a profound difference to our oceans. And in every way, we have bottom trawling, we have seabed mining, we have all kinds of things going on that are really bad for the oceans and aren't going to help the oceans rebound. And so this is a real opportunity to just say, all right, where can we protect the oceans and help them revive? It's to me, it's sort of 30% is doable, and it will make a huge difference. And so I just think it's something that I know the World Surf League is behind, and all kinds of other people you wouldn't imagine. So I think it's great to be on your show and spread the word about this, because there's a lot happening in this area now that is where there's a lot of progress and a lot of potential. And I think with climate, it's always so nice to find those hopeful things that are actually doable and that we can achieve.
There is a lot going on in this area, no doubt about it. And as I mentioned, you spoke at the 2016 Democratic Convention. Your candidate did not win then, but in 2020, Joe Biden won. And they won, Democrats won the House and the Senate, as you know. But they have not been able to pass the big sweeping climate bill. They did pass a transportation bill, but the climate bill. Have you been frustrated with that? Are you frustrated with Democrats like Joe Manchin that they haven't been able to do what they campaigned on?
I think that we'll be able to get it done. I think there's so many things that people on both sides of the aisle can agree on, and every single region of our country is being impacted by the effects of climate change, whether it's drought or floods or tornadoes, fire. This is not a partisan issue at all. And I know the oceans are a little more remote, but we all enjoy, we eat fish, we spend time by the ocean. I think that this is something that we can all find agreement on. And I think Joe Manchin can find it too. I think that, we'll pass whatever we can pass. Again, I think there's so much room for agreement. And Mother Earth is crying out. It's not as if we are agitating for this. Mother Earth is saying, help me, help me, help me. And it's very clear for all of us, no matter what our politics are. So I think it's any small thing we can do in our area and in our region is something I think that we should support.
We, not surprisingly, got a lot of questions from our audience, specifically for you. We do have one we picked from Taylor Austin, if we can roll that tape.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Taylor Austin. I'm a film studies major from Connecticut College, and my question is for Sigourney Weaver. I'm wondering, how has your passion for environmentalism influenced the projects that you decide to take on as an actor? And how do you foresee the film industry moving toward a greener future?
That's such a great question. I really do try to find projects that express what I'm passionate about. We do have Avatar 2 coming out this year, which is, it is, as Avatar 1 was, it has a very strong environmental message. And in this case of Avatar 2, a lot of it takes place in the oceans. Jim Cameron has said that, so I'm not going to get in trouble. So I feel very fortunate as an actor that I get to work on projects that I feel hopefully will make a difference around the world. I think people in our business are very aware of the power that our medium has to bring people together and to find a consensus. And it's one of the great things about our business. So I'm hoping that, I think we take that quite seriously in the business. Without making serious movies, we can make movies that have a really strong underlying commitment to certain truths. And so I'm very excited about Avatar. That's coming out December 16th. And we've been working on that for a long time. That took 18 months of filming. So I hope you enjoy that, Taylor. And I am trying to walk the walk and talk the talk in my work as well as in my private life.
Well, we definitely look forward to Avatar 2, especially my kids. As far as the message on climate change, critics say, well, listen, we don't have to worry about this. It's down the road. What do you think are the keys to making an effective message, which, as you know, is very important here in Washington, D.C., to move legislation? I know when you've talked about fixing the environment and saving the planet, you've been specific about farmers and ranchers. I've talked to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who's a big climate change champion, and he's talked about how it's changed the fishing industry. What do you think is the key in getting people to realize, no, you have to worry about this not in 5, 10 years, but you need to worry about it right now?
Well, again, I feel like every week, some part of our country is in the throes of an impact from a storm or high temperatures, droughts, floods that in a way that we haven't really seen before in the years before this decade. In the last 10 years, it's increased. And so I feel like, as I said, Mother Earth is sending a message to Congress and to all of us to just sort of wake up and do something about this while we still can. There's so much to be hopeful about. I feel like our businesses are moving very much toward green energy. The pandemic showed us the impact of having, incinerators and power plants and sewage waste treatments in these neighborhoods. It has a huge health impact. So I feel like we're all learning together about these things. And as we learn, people, grassroots, and certainly kids are saying, hey, Mom and Dad, let's do something about this. This is really happening. So I feel like the country, in a way, is ahead of Congress. and Congress needs to pay more attention to its constituents.
I know you mentioned this is a bipartisan issue because of the climate affects Republicans and Democrats. I just talked to John Curtis, a Republican from the conservative state of Utah, and he wants Republicans talking about climate change. But do you think in these polarizing times, we have the midterms coming up and then 2024, I know you've been critical of President Trump, who at one point called climate change a hoax, but do you think that the parties can come together, especially a party that's headed, at least for now, by Donald Trump?
Well, I think that there's so much more we can find agreement on that has nothing to do with politics. So many of these Congress people they're hunters. They respect nature. They understand its incredibly healing value to people. The importance of Americans to have national parks to go to, have state parks, have local parks. So I think that as citizens, there's so much for us to share about the importance of nature and respecting it. And, I don't think we should allow getting bogged down in the politics of the thing to keep us from seeing what's happening. I'm sure it's very tempting in DC to get caught up in the politics. But I think, again, I feel like people in cities and in the country, whether you're on the coast or inland, you're having so many problems that you didn't used to have to deal with. Serious droughts that go on forever, and the fires in California. My father grew up in California. There was never anything like that going on year after year, season after season. So, I don't think you could get a louder wake-up call than what we're already getting. And I think as individuals, people in Congress must be aware that people are very concerned about it. Kids are certainly very concerned about it. And, this is too important to let it be a partisan issue that we don't even get to. The idea that the midterms are going to take importance over, having clean water to drink, having clean air to breathe, having enough food supply. When you see what's happening in the world and how many, diasporas are moving away from areas that are now being hit by climate change, people are moving out of areas that are now deserts because they can't have any kind of subsistence farming going on. It's happening. And I think the people in Congress, for the most part, are paying enough attention to what's going on in the world to understand that, we can do both. You can have your quarrels and pick your leaders, but you also have to respect the earth we live on and how finite it is. So I'm hopeful. I think it's so easy to get discouraged and get caught up in all the noise. And I guess I feel like it's such an opportunity this year to do something like we are in the oceans. There's so much good happening, and who can disagree with the America the Beautiful initiative? We all love our country. We all know it's a beautiful country. We want to keep it that way. We want to keep it a safe, secure, clean, and healthy place for all of us. And I think that's something we can all agree on, regardless of where we're from or what we do, or where we stand in the political spectrum.
That's an excellent point. I really appreciate you taking the time out. Sigourney Weaver, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to Avatar 2, which will have a water theme, and I'm sure it'll have a sustainability type of message as well, and we look forward to that.
Indeed. So nice to be with you, Bob. Thanks so much.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program. Thanks again to Sigourney Weaver and to all of our terrific speakers for joining us. And of course, a huge thank you to the Environmental Defense Fund for its support, and to all of you for watching. For those of you who missed any of these conversations, you can see them this afternoon or from yesterday's sustainability sessions. You can see it on our website, thehill.com. It will be up there shortly. Thanks again for being with us today. I'm Bob Cusack. Be well.